we turn with reporting on what is, by all accounts, the important and stunning incident today in Los Angeles. This was during Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem's press conference. It's inside a federal building. Democratic United States Senator Alex Padilla of California enters, and as Nicole was just reporting, you will be able to see with your own eyes both what led into this and then the piece of tape that has gone, in the words of today, fully viral. It is all over the internet, it is all over the news. It is one of those stories that every corner of the news is equally covering. We don't have one part of the news saying this isn't news because it's just so significant. You rarely see this in modern American times. United States Senator forcibly removed, pinned to the ground by armed officers, cuffed, ultimately not arrested. So we'll explain all this, but we're going to walk you through it first with the video of what we think is the start of this as the secretary was speaking.
Leadership that this governor and that this mayor have placed on this country and what they have tried to insert into this city. So I want to say thank you to every single person that has been able to do this. Also, I want to talk specifically to the rioters and to the politicians in Los Angeles.
That is the beginning of the incident as we understand it, and it does matter, of course, what was happening and what was said. Indeed, as my colleague Nicole Wallace has reported and just referred to, there is now even some debate and pretty blatant misrepresentations from the Trump administration about what was said in those early moments. The video that I mentioned that's gone fully viral and that you'll see in a moment shows more of that from a different angle. From the audio feed that you heard there, you can't quite make out what Senator Padilla was saying. Secretary Noem was addressing these ongoing LA protests. The Times reports that when the senator first entered, he began to question the authenticity of a bank of mugshots behind the secretary. So that was one of the initial points of contention. The two were also supposed to meet today and later did. Now, the senator's office releases this video, which is a different angle of the altercation. You can see it's vertically shot on a cell phone from a different point of view, and it proceeds out of the room beyond what you just saw into agents pushing the United States Senator Padilla to the ground and cuffing him.
Straight hand and balancing. Sir, hands up, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the secretary because the fact of the matter is I have a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your.
I also want to typically how many of our fight agents have been stopped or implemented in
On the ground. On the ground. On the ground. Hands behind your back. Put hands behind your back.
If you don't my hand, go ahead. Put behind my back.
All right. Cool. Ankle in hand. Lay flat. Lay flat.
Other hand, sir. Other hand.
There's the recording loud out here.
That is what the agents did. You can hear a voice that appears to be one of the agents telling another apparently federal official, the U.S. Senator's aide, that recording is not allowed in that hallway. That is striking because while they were treating it as a security incident of some sort, this was a government-sponsored press conference. A recording was certainly allowed at least a few feet away, where a government DHS official is giving, quite specifically, a presentation to the press, recording allowed. This is a stunning moment here involving the sitting United States Senator from California, and we will be joined here by former Senator Barbara Boxer from that same state. She joins me in a moment. I just want to tell folks that's coming up while showing everyone what else we know. Padilla was not arrested as of this hour. That is not the indication of what occurred afterward. There is no statement that he was injured. He did speak after the incident about what he said occurred.
I will say this. If this is how this administration responds to a senator with a question, if this is how the Department of Homeland Security responds to a senator with a question, you can only imagine what they're doing to farm workers, to cooks, to day laborers out in the Los Angeles community and throughout California and throughout the country. We will hold this administration accountable.
The senator there emphasizing that point, the accountability, the role he plays in a co-equal branch, the substance, which he said he wanted to question the government on at that setting, including the veracity of various claims that DHS was making. Now, all of this comes amidst a very tense time for the use of federal force in this country, including the deployment of the National Guard by the president at the objection of the sitting governor of California, something that hasn't happened in 60 years. That governor, who has been clashing with the president, Gavin Newsom, said today that Senator Padilla is one of the most decent people he knows. This is, quote, outrageous, dictatorial, and shameful. Trump and his shock troops are out of control. This must end now. Another Californian senator, Adam Schiff, who's the other person, the sort of pair that represents California, says Noem should just resign. Dozens of Democrats are denouncing the arrest, calling for a formal investigation. Now, Homeland Security put out a statement that does more than one thing. I was just discussing this with Nicole Wallace, and I'm going to show it to you in a second. But note that this is not a situation where the Trump administration is saying, we're on a revenge tour, watch out, everything will be handled. Instead, they go to pains in the statement to suggest that now that they know what happened, they want to work with the senator, basically. But they also include what appear to be misrepresentations. Now for the statement from the government. Quote, Senator Padilla chose disrespectful political theater. He was told repeatedly to back away, did not comply with officers' repeated commands. Secret Service thought he was an attacker, and officers acted appropriately. Now, that is a claim that both can be debated. Indeed, we have guests on to test the claim tonight, but also reflects the fact that they apparently know, as Nicole and I were discussing, that treating Padilla that way as a sitting U.S. senator in a co-equal branch of government is totally unacceptable. And thus they are saying maybe he wasn't a senator. Maybe for a moment they thought he was an attacker in the fog of patrol. Here's a still photograph from an AP photographer that shows a bit of that crisis moment. Padilla, there on the right, trying to speak in that setting, several pushing him back. It's quite a day. It's pretty unheard of to see any U.S. senator treated this way. We're joined now by longtime veteran United States Senator from California, Barbara Boxer. Welcome. Where does this moment today fit into your lived experience as a precedent or an unprecedented thing? And what do you make of the government, the Trump administration's now response to what they did?
It's totally unprecedented. When I saw it, I'll tell you what I thought. I thought Russia. I thought North Korea. I held that seat for 24 years, the seat that Alex holds. And for those who don't know him, hopefully you'll get to know him. He is a workhorse, not a show horse. He is a family man. He's a first-generation American who went to MIT, whose parents came over with a green card from Mexico, and they did the toughest labor jobs you could imagine, cleaning houses, doing all of that. And here he is now being treated like a criminal. I view this as not only a physical attack on a United States senator, but an attack on this country, an attack on this Constitution. And if these Secret Service people don't know senators, they need to get into another profession. There's only 100 of us, and he's been there for quite a while.
So let's dip into that point.
This is troubling.
And Senator, your clear statement here is quite striking given your experience. Let's actually dip in journalistically to the point you raise, because I put their statement up. They are asserting, the government's asserting, the agents were treating this as sort of a live action threat, as a potential attacker. And you're saying in your experience, you don't buy that, and that they have and should have some knowledge of the top officials there.
Should? It's a prerequisite of the job to know. Listen.
Because that's part of what they protect, yeah.
When you have pages coming in to the Senate, they have to memorize not only the names, but the faces of all the members. But here's the thing. It's not only those people. I would call them, the way they acted like goons. If, I'm sure that they're, trying to do their job. But what about the Secretary of Homeland Security? She saw what was going on. She wasn't even scared. She knew what was going on, exactly what was going on, because Secretary Padilla is trying to get in touch with her to find out why they're betraying us in California and throughout the nation after lying and saying they were going after criminals, and they're putting little children little children into vans with their hands behind their back. They're breaking up graduations. They're knocking down pregnant women. One particular one was an American citizen. They're running after people in the fields of California who are picking the strawberries that everybody in the country can eat. We are a huge state. And yes, we have a lot of red areas and blue areas. But one thing we know, we get along because, yes, if someone's a criminal, goodbye. But if they are doing the
Yeah.
work and they're sincere, let them alone. And that's all that Alex Padilla, because I know him, he sees in the faces of all these people that are getting harassed, his parents.
Hmm.
And he knows how loving
Yeah, and
they were.
he spoke to that point today. He spoke about using, and this is something we've heard, as you know, Senator, people around the country call on leaders to do, which is to step up and figure out any way to fight. He clearly said he was trying to embody and channel that and look if this is how they'll treat him. We've been careful today to show the video. The video really speaks for itself in this instance, but also report out the government response from the administration. Here was what the secretary said on Fox in part.
This man burst into the room, started lunging towards the podium, interrupting me and elevating his voice, and was stopped, did not identify himself, and was removed from the room. So as soon as he identified himself, appropriate actions were taken.
A fact check and then your response. I'll say here in the newsroom, we've consulted the video. We've played it more than once. He identifies himself verbally, and because the attention was on him, the lawyer in me would say it's a reasonable inference that people in earshot could hear him say, I'm the senator, above and beyond the point you raised earlier of that being known. So it's false when she says he didn't identify himself at all. Your response to the rest?
Yeah, and again, she stood there, she saw the whole thing happen, she didn't even break her sentence. This man came. She knows who the senators are. She had to go before the Senate for her confirmation. But here's the thing, I did something I haven't done ever since I left. I contacted John Thune today, and
Oh,
I
you
said
did?
to him, "This is an attack on the United States Senate. This is an attack on the institution of the Senate because anybody in the course of their work, if they weren't able to get in touch with the secretary and she was in their state and their people were getting abused and harmed without due process and nabbed and disappeared and identifying themselves, my goodness." And, again, you got to know Alex. Alex
Let me
is
let me ask you
calmest person.
on Senator Thune. You're saying, and again, you have this emeritus role, right? You guys go on the floor. You have a special role. I will say that in public, the Majority Leader Thune has said, "quote." He wanted to get the facts and find out what happened before we make any comments about it. The facts are somewhat available on video. Is that an acceptable response to you, or what do you want to hear from him?
Well, I'm glad he didn't just do what the Speaker of the House did, which is bow down to the king and say, "Oh, the senator was terrible." He doesn't know anything that happened. So I'm going to give him the time. But I was happy to write to him. I CC'd Chuck Schumer, and I said, "This is wrong for the Senate. We are an equal branch of government. We are doing our work. He is doing his work. This isn't pleasant to go there and confront her, but he can't get an answer. Again, why? You have to ask the question. This wasn't a stunt. This was a way to get her attention, to tell her they are not doing what they said they were going to do. Go get the bad guys like Barack Obama did. He deported so many people, but Trump and all his friends there, they are desperate. They have quota systems. They want numbers. They don't care who they harm, who they hurt, including little kids with cancer. And I'm sorry to be very emotional, but I am, and you know me, I'm who I am.
No, I appreciate it. I think a lot of people can hear you quite clearly. Senator Barbara Boxer, longtime California senator, speaking about your successor tonight amidst this development. Thank you very much. Let me tell folks what's coming up because it's one of these sort of fast-moving hours, as I was discussing with Nicole Wallace. Senator Padilla made those brief remarks actually when he emerged from what you just saw, being pinned to the ground, cuffed, then released without arrest. That's the only sort of statement we've heard from him, and he didn't take questions in that setting. I can tell you this hour, he will be on MSNBC. MSNBC reporter Jacob Soboroff will have Senator Padilla join the beat. We will get that exclusive live interview, his first question and answer period since this incident tonight. That's coming up in the 6 p.m. hour, first on MSNBC. We're going to finish a short break. Tonight, we also have John Flannery and Alex Wagner on this story next. We are back on this extraordinary news day. We are joined by our colleague, MSNBC senior political analyst, Alex Wagner, who hosts the Trumpland podcast, who's going to give some thoughts on this. But it's one of those nights, Alex, where I just want to take the incident, and there's already been some government misstatements about the incident. I just want to play for people what happened to the U.S. Senator, and then we'll discuss this on the other side.
Straight hand and balancing. Sir, hands up, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have a question for the secretary, because the fact of the matter is, I have a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your.
I also want to typically how many of our ICE agents have been down?
On the ground. On the ground. On the ground. Hands on your back. Hands on your back.
If you don't have hands, cool. I put behind my back.
All right. Cool. Ankle in hand. Lay flat. Lay flat. Other hand, sir. Other hand.
There's no recording loud out here. What are we witnessing?
I think on, sort of the initial reaction, which, can't go unstated, is this does represent, in the words of former Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a red line. This has never happened before. We shouldn't accept this. We shouldn't accept a senator or really any other elected official whose job is to provide oversight. I mean, the Senate's role is to advise and consent.
Mhm.
I would love to know what the senator was trying to ask Secretary Noem, the rest of that sentence.
And also, he partly said that he alleges there was some misleading material about immigrants that she was presenting.
Correct. And there has been a lot of very questionable assertions on the part of that Homeland Security Secretary in particular, right? So that's his role. He's supposed to be doing that. The canard that she didn't know who he was, this is the Homeland Security Secretary not knowing who the senior senator from the state in which her cabinet agency is conducting large-scale immigration raids is laughable. That is inexcusable.
Mhm.
We also very clearly hear him say, I am Senator Alex Padilla, right? None of this is excusable. None of this is acceptable. The Trump administration should have to answer for it. And by the way, the American public should be putting the question to him as much as the media. But I will say, Ari, this is what happens when you have an administration that is much more like a dictatorship than it is a part of a functioning democracy, trying to cover up what is effectively an entire reordering of both the American economy and American democracy. I mean, to reach a 3,000 person immigration deportation quota, which is their announced, quota for deportations, you have to involve yourself in every facet of American life. You have to cast dragnets that are so wide that not only are you going to get American citizens, you are going to get people who are an essential part of the fabric of our society, which is why they don't want anybody asking questions.
In use of force protocol, there is supposed to be a ladder, and more serious force and deadly force come last. When you have a president who openly urges these kind of crackdowns and the use of force earlier and sometimes against policy, is this what you get? In other words, if you say, oh, well, sometimes people who are disruptive are removed from events, and you want to go that far to the benefit of the doubt, that doesn't usually then involve, after figuring out who they are, if you even want to say some agents were ignorant, then you go in the hallway, why are you handcuffing him? He said he's a U.S. senator and he's no longer a disruption in the room. Or is that the environment that Trump has fomented?
Listen, I think you have to look at this as part of a suite of behaviors. A congresswoman, LaMonica McIver, has been charged by the federal government for crimes relating to her job as a person in Congress trying to see what's happening at a 1,000-bed detention facility in the state of New Jersey that is being run by a private prison company. People who ask questions, no matter where they are in government or in American society, are open season for this administration. And I do think the Trump administration saw what it could and did do with Ras Baraka, the mayor of Newark, and a sitting U.S. congressperson. They feel like they can operate with a certain amount of impunity. So when a sitting U.S. senator, the senior Democrat, the senior senator from the state of California, attempts to answer a question, they can do whatever they want to him. Now, I do think she should be asked many times why that level of force, right? Why and how that is justified for someone who's clearly not disturbing anything and identifies himself and is there performing his role as a sitting U.S. senator.
Yeah. I think you put it clearly. And this point that serious people view the lines as crossed, the test is here. The National Guard is in the street without a governor involved. The Marines are being called up, and we're going to see what happens to them. It's all here.
It's all part of the same.
The opposition being indicted is here. Some cases fell apart. Mayor Barack was in the seat you're in a week ago talking about how he's countersuing, but the other lawmaker cases you mentioned is ongoing. And so it's all here. I appreciate your candor as always, Alex.
I'm always truthful with you.
Facts. Good to see you.
You too.
And even with a smile amidst a rainy day.
Not smiley day.
I'm going to tell folks the first interview with Senator Padilla will be on MSNBC about this incident live in this hour and the clash about military force. Stay with us. California Governor Gavin Newsom took the Trump administration to court, and that's where they are today. The state wants to restrict the use of the National Guard by the federal government, as well as this effort to involve the Marines. Trump says that he can federalize troops in the event of invasion or rebellion. This is the terminology that seems to be stretched to the breaking point, and the government said only the president decides if there's an invasion or rebellion. It's an inherently political question, not for courts to decide. That's according to an unofficial transcript or summary of what they're arguing. The judge pushed back and seemed skeptical of the idea that the courts have no role to play, because then, if you follow that logic, any president could just call anything a rebellion and have the Guard in all 50 states. Quote, the president is not commander-in-chief of the National Guard, the judge noted. That's the difference between a constitutional government and King George. It's not that a leader can simply say something and it becomes it. We live in response to a monarchy, is how the Los Angeles Times headlined the judge's concerns. Now, the state basically wants the court to stop this in real time. That's not always how courts deal with these kind of live action issues if the Guard's already been deployed. But Governor Newsom says just sitting around and hoping it goes away or not dealing with this is a slippery slope.
This is about you. California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived.
The moment has arrived. Those were new words from the governor here before the arrest of another California official, the Democrat Senator Padilla, today. The moment here again, according to many who witnessed that today. Meanwhile, the judge says there will be an order or a response, quote, very soon. Counselor John Flannery, a former federal prosecutor who's also worked as a congressional counsel in that co-equal branch, joins us. John, what are we witnessing today, and what is the import of what the judge said, sounding at least skeptical of Trump's efforts?
Well, I think what we have here is we have a judge who knows the law and knows his position in the tripartite government that we have. And so when the government says, oh, it's up to the president to decide this, excuse me, maybe a first-year law student who is dumb and never read anything could say something like that. But the statute upon which these decisions are made, what one may do with force, is a statute that is subject to review by the judiciary. And yes, it may empower a president to do something, but the judge gets the chance to decide if it's constitutional or not, either by the way it's stated or in its application. In its application in this case, there's none of these things that justify using that kind of force. And so as a result, the judge, I would have thought on the first day, would have said, sorry, textually and every other way, you don't have any authority to do what you're doing. But then on top of it, we see in terms of the way they operate in which the means always justifies, is always there to justify the end. So, for example, when there's talk about maybe we should prosecute the governor, Newsom, who was just on the air, and the answer is they said that, well, he should be arrested. He committed a crime. And then when they confronted Trump, what is the crime? He got elected. Was the same thing true of Padilla today when he got elected? And what about the congresswoman in New Jersey? Was she elected? And that's mobster stuff, that's dictatorship stuff, that is not a democracy. And if we wonder why America is in a crisis, it's because if you remove all the laws and all the rules, can we stand in the wind that blows? That's what I've been saying forever, quoting Sir Thomas More in that famous play. And that's where we are now. So what's happening? People are improvising to do the right thing. And so we have a nation that's going to celebrate its resistance to a president who is marching to monarchy, not serving the people as a republic, his oath, or a democracy, his oath. He is not preserving and protecting it. He is destroying it for his own power.
Right.
And the nation is rightly rejecting the fact that he can have a $40 million birthday party on Saturday. 76% have voted against that. And those people will be in the streets all over America, not doing anything violent, protesting the fact that violence is the rule of law in this nation now under Trump.
The judges have a test of their own here. We saw the Supreme Court draw a sort of line on the mistaken deportation of Garcia. And there was testing and there was a lot of brazen claims. But within 2 months, last week, the DOJ yielded. And people can say, oh, it should have been 5 weeks earlier. Okay. But it seemed to show that if the Supreme Court actually said no, it mattered. And yet so often, as you know, there's this effort to delay, to off-ramp, to do mootness, all the legal mumbo-jumbo that you and I know, when clearly the testing going on from the Trump side is what can they get away with? Do you think in some sense that requires judges to be more urgent and vigilant?
Well, I think that the Garcia case, which you reference, is a perfect example of the fact that the courts do matter, because they backed off saying, oh, I'll bring him home or not. It's up to me. I'm going to leave him there. I'm not going to do it. And then they did. But what did they do to offset it in terms of media and press? They're charging Garcia with a crime. And a prosecutor on the case, who has not said why, has resigned his office. We've seen this before. We have a whole Justice Department based on it being a tool, a political tool. It makes Nixon's list of enemies look like a party game. This guy will he will allow people to be assaulted. He will slander them in ways without truth. He will do all manner of things to run down our opportunity to exercise access to the government by the First Amendment. And that's a lot of what this is, including what happened today.
Yeah. This is what the judge said about the king's effort, the monarchies. We've seen now even in protests them saying no kings. The judge says, how is this different than what a monarchist does? He says things, he finds certain things, he does certain things. That's not where we live. We live in response to a monarchy. The Constitution is a document of limitations. It seems that more judges are talking about this the way, frankly, people talk about it sometimes in real conversation or in the streets or on the internet, which is enough already. It cannot be, can it, John, that we have all these rules and limitations, but if the president just says a magic word, he just says rebellion, then he can rule with force, federal force over these lands. It cannot be, can it?
No, it cannot be. And Governor Newsom put his finger on it when he said, basically, we have an inert Congress. If all those people who saw this for what it is, that is a compromise, a threat to our democracy, were to go out and speak all around this nation, since they don't get a thing done on the Hill, because you saw what happened with the sanctuary city things today. Children in kindergarten act better than the Republicans, who were trying to force to get the answer they wanted to prove their case. And they couldn't get it because we have such skilled and competent and terrific people who are governors of these states. And so that's our challenge. And I believe that the courts and what happens with we the people, the starting point of our Constitution, and those members of Congress who get some nerve and go out and do what they're supposed to do and haven't done, I believe that's how we're going to crush this motion to become an autocracy.
Right,
and
to
I
go
think that's
to go
what we
full,
should be, and that's where we're going to be.
To go full autocrat on a week where the use of federal power and force is clearly under scrutiny. John Flannery, thank you. The counselor mentioned Senator Padilla. He is the exclusive guest speaking first here on MSNBC Live. Next. Breaking news here. All eyes have been on Democratic U.S. Senator Alex Padilla since he was forcefully ejected and handcuffed from a DHS briefing today, an incident that has sparked outrage and concern across Washington and the country. He spoke briefly after leaving that building, but now is on MSNBC for his first exclusive question and answer interview. Jacob Soboroff, who's been covering the story for us, is with the senator. Jacob?
Ari, thank you very much. I'm joined right now by Senator Alex Padilla. Senator, thank you so much for joining us live on MSNBC. First question, how are you? We all watched the video. We saw you taken to the floor by those agents. How are you doing?
Yeah, look, I'm okay. I've been on the phone off and on with kids, right? Because my kids travels fast in this day and age with technology, make sure they're okay. But I think most importantly is the outrage that I hope people feel. If this can happen to a United States senator for having the audacity to ask a question of the Secretary of Homeland Security, the same questions for and requests for information that we've had, not just the last sort of week or so, the activity in Los Angeles, but since the beginning of the administration, then just imagine what can happen to anybody in the country for that matter.
We heard from you briefly at the press conference after you came outside of the federal building in Westwood. We've heard more extensively from Secretary Noem and the Department of Homeland Security, and I want to just tell you a little bit because I'm sure this has been a whirlwind about what they've been saying. Secretary Noem said that you, quote, lunged towards her at this press conference. The Department of Homeland Security said the Secret Service believed that you were an attacker, and the Department of Homeland Security called this political theater. What's your response, and what's your version of what happened?
Well, first of all, that's ridiculous. It's a lie, but par for the course for this administration, right? So here's the stage. Look, I was in the federal building here in Los Angeles for a scheduled briefing. Just as when my colleagues and I had to go all the way to Guantanamo Bay to begin to get information about that facility being used as a detention facility, they've been non-responsive to requests for information. And so I had scheduled, they approved a briefing with representatives of the Northern Command in that federal building. We were there prior to the 10:30 original appointment date when we caught wind that Secretary of Homeland Security is going to be down the hall at a press conference. And our briefing was now delayed because of that press conference. So since the secretary has been non-responsive, I figured let me go over and listen to what she has to say. Maybe we can glean some information here.
So let me make sure I understand that. Go ahead.
So
Go
the
ahead,
whole
Senator.
time, right? We're the whole time being escorted in this federal building by somebody from the National Guard, somebody from the FBI. I've gone through screening. This is a federal building. And so tell them, let's go listen to the press conference. They escort me over to that room. And I'm sitting in the back of the room behind the cameras, behind the reporters, listening. And at one point, it was just too much to take. Not the first, but the second attack on the political leadership of California and this notion that Donald Trump and Kristi Noem had to come in and rescue the people of Los Angeles from Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass. It was too much. And so I spoke up. I introduced myself. And said I had a question. Look, they said I wasn't wearing my pen. My polo says United States Senate. There was no threat. There was no lunging. I raised my voice to ask a question, and it took maybe half a second before multiple agents were on me.
The video clearly shows, and you can hear on the audio, that you identify yourself as Senator Padilla. Did you? She said you barged into the room, or you basically broke into the room. I'm paraphrasing here. Just set the record straight on that.
I didn't barge into the room. As I mentioned, I was in a different conference room, a couple doors down the hall. I let it be known I'd like to go listen to the press conference. The folks that were escorting me in the building walked me over. I didn't even open the door. The door was open for me. And I spent a few minutes in the back of the room just listening in until the political rhetoric got to be too much to take. So I spoke up.
Have you seen the video yet? Well, you can look here, Senator. Have you actually watched it yourself? When you watch this, and let's go through this together. Describe to me what you're seeing. What's happening here?
Yeah, again, well, multiple people forcibly removing from the room. I know I was trying to do two things at once, try to get my question out while trying not to lose my balance. They first asked me to, get down on my knees. Like growing up where I grew up, you know what happens if you don't obey law enforcement. And so I began to go on my knees to the extent that they would let me because they were literally handling me at the same time. And it went from getting on her knees to flat on the floor, which I tried, but wasn't able to easily because of the folks handling me. They put handcuffs on me. So yes, I was handcuffed.
These are FBI agents. Did they tell you who they were?
They wouldn't identify themselves. And I kept repeatedly asking themselves, why am I being detained? No answer. Why am I being detained? No answer. Why am I being detained? No answer. Then they get me back up on my feet and we start walking. Don't tell me where we're going.
You were handcuffed at this point.
Absolutely. Am I being led back outside? I don't know. Am I being taken to a cell? I don't know. They were not communicative until somebody from, I'm sure, Secretary Noem's team figured out I was who I said I was and finally said, let him go.
And so they let you go. They took the handcuffs off. What happened next? There were reports that you met with Secretary Noem for 15 minutes after the press conference was over.
So this is a little surreal. So they took the handcuffs off. The person that came over said, well, if you'd like to meet with the secretary, you can do so after the press conference is over. Sure, I've been dying to get information from the department for months. I'll take this opportunity and see what I can glean. Then I was asked, but the other briefing that you're here for, the previously scheduled briefing, would you still like that briefing? Of course, that's why we came. That one never happened because the representatives from Northern Command left and again, didn't give us an excuse. So hoped for another opportunity to learn from them. Like, again, what's the mission of the National Guard here? What training have what's normally state National Guards, now federalized National Guard service women and men, if they're going to be out in communities, if they're going to be interfacing with civilians? This is not a normal job for them. And by the way, they're being taken away from other critical missions in the state of California to do this function. Now we hear the Marines are coming. For what purpose? What's the mission? What type of training preparation have they had?
Did you get answers to any of these questions?
None. And so, again, did have an opportunity to sit with the Secretary Noem for a few minutes. You know, you think she might have started the meeting with an apology of what happened. Of course not. And so I began to ask the question I was trying to ask in the press conference. For all the touting of the Trump administration of going after violent criminals, I told her, there's no disagreement there. If that's all you were doing, there would be no debate, there would be no discussion. But what's happening in reality is far different than that, because we hear story after story after story of non-violent migrants who many are working in very essential jobs for our economy, being rounded up, right? The cruelty with which they're doing this, the increased cruelty with which they're doing this, escalating here in Los Angeles over the course of the last week. You don't need flashbangs, you know, when you're trying to target one person. National Guard over, not at the request of a governor. It hasn't happened since 1965. And so, of course, they're instigating, trying to create the response and a reaction from community, and will point to anything to further escalate the situation. It's wrong and it's counterproductive.
Senator Padilla, we're here on my colleague Ari Melber's program, The Beat, on MSNBC, and I know Ari wants to ask you a question. Ari, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob, and thanks to the Senator for joining us. You've now described the incident here for the first time. Do you view it as excessive force? As Jacob referenced, the administration is saying they were trying to basically do safety or security. Do you view it as excessive force or an effort to intimidate the opposition party?
Look, personally, I think it was excessive. I was in no way, lunging or threatening in any way. Again, consider where we were, in a secure federal building. I was being escorted. So definitely an overreaction, uncalled for, but it's not about me. Again, this is the biggest point. It's not about me. If they're willing to do this to me, a United States Senator representing the state of California, just to imagine how it's going with their immigration enforcement on the streets when they show up at restaurants and are trying to detain a cook, or outside a Home Depot trying to detain a day laborer, or on the fields in Oxnard a couple of days ago detaining farm workers. You can just imagine. But that's a tone and approach that this administration has chosen to take. In many cases, I'm convinced it's unlawful and unconstitutional, and I have to do my job as a senator to insist on information and accountability and the rule of law.
And Senator, what do you think would be the right remedy then for this? We saw in the case of the mayor of Newark, who was, like you, sort of, as the one word used was manhandled. He was arrested. He was charged. You were not. But then they drop the case. He's suing them, seeking redress. Do you see this incident as closed, or do you think there is something more they must do to properly respect the co-equal branch of government at a time where the expansive use of federal forces from the National Guard to the Marines is also, as beyond you, a big question? Do you think that more must be done, more accountability for the Trump administration for what happened today?
Look, it's not about me. I'm still processing what happened to me. But to the extent that we have shed more light on what they're doing and how they're doing it, the public deserves to be aware. To suggest that they have to come into Los Angeles to restore order. Look, Jacob, you know Los Angeles. It's a big, spread out city. The images that we've seen over the course of the last week of some vandalism, some violence, etc., that's wrong, and I denounce it. But it's very small and very contained in a big metropolis of the Los Angeles area. So the National Guard was not necessary. But folks have responded to that. It's the Trump administration continuing to escalate. A couple of days ago, he's saying that things are better now that the National Guard has shown up. If things were better, why is he now considering sending in the Marines? They're continuing to escalate. It doesn't have to be this way.
Can you clarify for us, Senator Padilla? You were there to have this meeting with the Northern Command in charge of some of the troops that are on the ground here in Los Angeles. Did you ultimately have that meeting, and did you ultimately get any answers from Northern Command about, for instance, there's this hearing in the courts today, the state of California is suing the administration over the deployment of the troops to California. Did you get any indication one way or another whether Northern Command, the military, would respect the outcome of what Judge Breyer says in this court case today?
Well, that was one of the questions I had for them. But unfortunately, the briefing never happened. And so we never got an answer to that question.
Your colleagues are marching to the office of Leader Thune to demonstrate on your behalf, to call for justice for what happened to you. But those are your Democratic colleagues. Have you heard anything from a single Republican member of the U.S. Senate or the House about what happened to you?
Haven't spoken to any of my Republican colleagues yet. I will say there's two that at least sent a text message saying that they denounce what happened, checking to see if I'm okay. Senator Sheehy from Montana, Senator Curtis from Utah. But the point is this: if my colleagues are now at Leader Thune's office, and this is a question I've been asking all my Republican colleagues since the beginning of Trump's term, when is enough enough? The audacity for how this administration has gone after their political agenda. When I hear behind closed doors, well, once he gets, crosses a certain line, then we're going to start to rein him in. But they keep saying yes to every ask he makes, every nominee he puts forward. When is enough enough? When they feel no repercussions for putting a United States senator in handcuffs for the audacity to ask a question and to speak up for fundamental rights and due process. When is enough enough?
You became emotional when you came outside and spoke after this happened to you. And I want to make sure that I tell everybody specifically what it was that you were talking about when you teared up. You talked about farmers and cooks and day laborers. You spoke in Spanish. I've heard you often speak about your father, who was a short order cook, and your mother, who cleaned homes. You grew up here in the Northeast San Fernando Valley in a neighborhood called Pacoima. You played baseball in high school. You went to MIT, and you came back and you became the leader of the city council, the youngest ever, first Latino. You went to the state Senate. You became the Secretary of State of California, and now you're the senior senator from California. But why is it that? Why is it farmers and cooks and day laborers that put tears in your eyes?
Because I understand their plight. I understand their struggle. I understand their sacrifice to just find the American dream, a good opportunity, maybe a good job, the ability to raise a family and have the next generation have it a little bit better than you do. And so for all the talk about immigration, the misinformation, disinformation about invasions and insurrections, it's all BS coming from Trump. As I said before, if all they were going to do is target violent, dangerous criminals, true threats to our national security, that'd be one thing. Nobody has a disagreement there. But what's happening in practice is so many, yes, maybe undocumented immigrants, but who are otherwise law-abiding, peaceful, and hardworking. To think this administration changed policy for federal agents to enter schools, houses of worship, let alone workplaces. If immigrants are that bad, why is that where you're looking for them? And as I take a step back and take a deep breath, I get to remind everybody this is the state of California, not only the most populous state in the nation, the most diverse state in the nation, home to more immigrants than any state in the nation, mostly documented immigrants, legal immigrants. But yeah, there's a good number of undocumented immigrants. But this is also California, that's the largest economy of any state in the nation, fourth largest economy in the world. It's not despite the immigrant population, it's because of the contributions of so many immigrants as workforce, as consumers, as entrepreneurs. You know, if your interest is in improving safety of communities, facilitating thriving communities and economic growth, this is something to embrace, not to attack. But sadly, Donald Trump has had it since the first time he came down the escalator at Trump Tower before the 2016 election.
Your mom and your dad were both immigrants from Mexico. When you look at the protesters on the streets that are standing up to, they started on Friday against the ICE raids. Now they're out there against the National Guard and against the Marines coming to the streets. Do you see yourself? Do you see your mom and dad and the protesters that are out there pushing back against this administration?
Yeah, I see not just families like mine, but families like most of the families that I grew up with. All right. And that was me back in 2006 during one of the many waves of a push for the modernization of our immigration laws. That was me in 1994, fresh home from college when we had Proposition 187 on the ballot here in California, a precursor to a lot of the Trump anti-immigrant rhetoric when then Governor Pete Wilson, down in the polls, up for re-election, chose to play that immigrant scapegoating card. It was that measure that caused people like my parents who had been here literally for decades with no sense of urgency to naturalize and become citizens to finally do so that they could register and vote, realizing that while their past may be in another country, they were firmly established here, their future was here, and they ought to assimilate completely. And it was that measure that got me and so many other people in my generation finally involved in the political process. I think California, as a result, is much different today than it was in 1994. And we're proudly doing our part to lead not just on immigrant rights issues, but access to healthcare issues, quality of education issues, tackling climate change, protecting, reproductive rights in marriage equality, and so much more. And we're the fourth largest economy in the world. Again, this is a model, a recipe, a playbook for other states, if not the country, to follow, not fear.
Both Mayor Bass and Governor Newsom, who have stood up on your behalf, spoken out on your behalf in the wake